And here we are with video 3.5 on domain and range. I apologize for the sound of my voice. I lost it with this weather, but hopefully you can understand me. Make sure you take your notes. So some vocabulary you need to put down first. Obviously, this is domain and range. So what is domain and range? Domain and range for any situation, the domain is all the input values, and the range would be all the output values. So whatever is inputted, the range would be the output. Domain, input, range, output. And when we're looking at graphs like the one we have here, it's all the x values of whatever the graph is and all the y values. So I have the example that you should get down right here. So we're looking at the domain. We need to look at the x values. And this is what we call a discrete function because it just is some points. It's not continuous. It's not a line that would be like that or like that. And to find the domain, you just have to label the x value of every coordinate. So the x value of this coordinate is -1. And the x value of this coordinate is +1. And the x value of each of these coordinates is +3. So because it goes twice, you don't have to write it twice. And then the range would just be the y value of each of the coordinates. So the y value of this one is 4. The y value of this point is 2. The y value of this point is -1. And the y value of this point is -3. And you can see them all here too. So that's all you have to do for domain and range when you have coordinates. There's different things you have to do when you have graphs or different situations, and that's what we're going to take a look at next. So we have 5 examples here, and we're going to look at the domain and range of each of these. So let's look at this first table right here. This one's pretty straightforward. These would be points put on a coordinate plane. So all you have to do for domain and range, I'm just going to label them D and R, is list what is already listed for you. So the domain is the x values and the range is the y values. You can put them in numerical order too if you would like. That one's pretty simple. But let's look at the next one. So let's look at the domain first, my x values. Remember that I have my x-axis and my y-axis, so I'm going to look at my x-axis for my x values. And I see that it's going from -5 to positive, let's see what that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, to +8. So how I would write that as a domain would be, this is why we went over inequalities. We write it as a compound inequality, or it's called interval notation. So we write our x, and x is greater than or equal to, because of the filled in dot, -5, but it's less than or equal to +8. So let's look at that again. So x, the domain, is greater than or equal to -5, but less than or equal to 8. It's in between 5 and 8. And let's look at our y values. So our y values go from, for our range, from the lowest point, which is -3, to the highest point, which is +2. So I'm going to write it in pretty much the same way, that y is greater than or equal to -3, but less than or equal to 2. If you have questions about that, we'll do more of it tomorrow, but that's just a brief way when you have functions like this to write your domain and range, and this is the easiest way to see it in interval notation, so you can see what x goes in between and what y goes in between. Let's look at our parabola next. This is called a parabola, and I see that for my domain, it's going to just keep going and going in both directions across the x-axis. So when I have domain, I would say all real numbers, because it's going to go from negative infinity on the x-axis to positive infinity on the x-axis. It's not going to stop moving in either direction. And I want you to write this in your notes. The symbol for real numbers is that like kind of double R thing right there. So that's what I'm going to write from now on. Now, our range is a little different because it doesn't go below 2. So for our range, you have to write it as y, but it goes above 2 is greater than or equal to 2. Let's move on to our next one. We have the domain and the range. For this one, across the x-axis for our domain, it's going to just keep going in either direction. So again, it's all real numbers. And the same for my y-axis, is just going to keep going up and down. While it's not going at a very strong slope, it will continue going in both directions forever. So again, it's all real numbers. And let's look at the last one quickly. So we have a domain. We're seeing a pattern here. It's going across the x-axis. It's going to keep going in all directions. So the domain is all real numbers. And then for my y-axis, for my range, it's only staying at 4. So my range is 4. Or y equals 4. You can say it and be more specific. Okay, if you have questions about this, please write it down. We'll go over it tomorrow. And next, sometimes you're going to have domain and range in context. So let's look at this first, example here. Did not mean to do that. And this is U.S. crude oil proved reserves. And we're just going to look at the domain and range. So I see we're going from 0 to up to 40,000 for our range. That's our range. That's our y values. So I did range first. So range is y is greater than or equal to 0, but less than or equal to 40,000. And then our domain goes from 1900 to 2010. So x is between 1900 and 2010. And then the range for the phone, this is where input and output comes in, because each button does a different thing. So you don't need to write this down, but let's just look at it. So the call button, the input is the call button to push. The output is that you either make a call or answer a call. The end call, input is to push, output is you end a call or reject a call if you don't want to talk to somebody. The 1 button, you push it, you get a 1. So the input, the domain would be 1, and the output would be 1. So the domain is 1 and the range is 1. And for 2, it's the same thing. The domain is 2 and the range is 2. The domain would be pushing 2, but the range could also be A, B, or C. 3, the domain is pushing 3, and the range is 3 or D, E, F. So that's how it goes for all of these. You have your domain, which is pushing the button, pushing button or number, and then the range would be the result of push. That's just a way to put domain and range in context. And your hot question, state the domain and range of this graph. Remember, look at its endpoints for your domain for the x, and then its endpoints for your range for y. And put the domain and range into your hot question answer. If you have any questions about this, we'll talk about it in class tomorrow.